Here is an outline of what we'll be covering today. We'll just do an overview of the ping post process. We'll talk about getting those different types of inbound leads. Not everything is ping post. We'll talk about the different options there. We'll then obviously talk about the opposite, which is outbound lead routing or selling, whether that's via email, direct post, or ping post. And then we'll get into some options for distribution logic when you are selling leads, and then options for buying leads, both in ping post environment. And of course, we'll open it up for any questions that you may have here. So to get started, what is ping post? The definition that I use is that ping post is the process of a lead seller sending partial non-contact information to a lead buyer, giving them the opportunity to bid on that lead, and before the full lead details are sent to that partner. So it is the process of a seller sending partial information and then only sending the full details to the winner. This process can obviously have a lot of companies or entities in that flow between the generator of the lead and the ultimate seller of the lead. And typically they get involved, and that is where things like margin come into play. In terms of what is sent on a ping, that is going to depend. So it depends on the vertical, it depends on the vendor, and it depends on what the buyer requires. So in many lead types, there's pretty consistent requirements as far as what is pinged across. But then in other verticals, it is much more variable. Different buyers may require things like incident date in a legal vertical where others may not. And then if you look at health insurance, income may be something that some require and others do not. In general, you're going to have your geo, the zip code typically, which is pinged over. The age, if that is part of the lead type, is also a big determining factor. And then again, those lead type specific fields. That's something from a buyer side, it is what fields you want to make a business decision on that incoming ping. So if you want to make a decision on something that is not being pinged, you can ask for that, or have that vendor establish a default value. Similarly, from the seller's point of view, you can determine what you are pinging out to the buyers, make that consistent across the board, and then address any exceptions or that are by the lead buyer. So the next question then, of course, is what is sent on the post? What is sent on the post is the rest of the information. Typically, that is PII, or personal identifiable information, the name, address, phone number, email of the lead itself. But it may essentially include anything that is not sent on the ping. There can be some ambiguity. So for example, trusted form or Jernaya, is that sent on the ping? Is that sent on the post? That is something that there is not a general consensus that I'm aware of in the industry. Some companies will send it, some do not. And then some of those products have the opportunity to send masked values. So really, from a seller's point of view, you have to take evaluation of what your buyers require so that you can fulfill that. And then from the buyer side, do you need that information on the ping, or is that something that's sufficient to be sent on the post, because that's where you're going to be doing your claiming of those certificates anyway. So that kind of leads into the next part, which is, when is that transaction complete? When is the ping post process complete? If we kind of get out of the the slideshow here and we jump into some of these infographics here. So a vendor pings that partial non-contact information to your boberdoo system. You in turn then evaluate that ping. Does it match any partners in the system that are active, have available funds, and a matching filter set? If the answer there is yes, that is where the opportunity exists to carve out a profit margin, either based on the filter set or based on the source level, and then return the rest to the vendor as your represented bid. Now, if that bid is accepted by the vendor, typically meaning it's the highest price in their ping tree, they would post the full lead details into your boberdoo system. Your boberdoo system then delivers the final lead post to the partner and waits for that success response before returning the matched response to your vendor. So it's important to know that that is a sequential process, because if there is any breaks along that process in the post, that is where post rejects occur. And we'll talk a little bit more about those here in a second. So we're going to kind of go to the next one, potential outcomes on the ping, potential outcomes on the post. We talked a little bit about it, but specific to boberdoo. So when a ping comes in from a vendor to the boberdoo system, we are talking about the left side of this infographic here. The potential responses are matched, unmatched, or error. Error is pretty self-explanatory. The vendor didn't send something that was required by you, or they sent it incorrectly. They need to try again. Matched means that the system essentially was able to go through this routing process, eliminate any non-active, not available partners without available funds and partners without a matching filter set, sort multiple matches, and then determine if the post comes in, who is that matched partner and filter set that it would be sent to. Now we have unmatched. Unmatched means that when the system was going through that decisioning process, when we got to this step here, we excluded all of the partners in the system. So therefore, a matched response comes in. That brings us to then those potential outcomes on the post that we were just talking about. So along the way, when you return the matched response back to the seller, that means that the transaction is successful and complete. And unmatched is where we get into post rejects. What that means is when the full lead details came into step one, we excluded additional partners, typically their filter sets, that were included on the ping. So that means either they sent additional fields that caused the filter set to exclude. That's very common. Another one is a duplicate. So the lead comes in and it's and attempts to sell to your partner. Your partner rejects that lead as a duplicate. Then your system rejects that lead back as a duplicate, post rejects that lead. Or a duplicate coming into your system. So those are all potentials. The other big one would be lead scoring. So with things like our outside services, you can make third-party calls to APIs for things like lead scoring, the NC check, and then post reject the leads at that stage. And then finally, the error that is going to be, there is something wrong with that post. The lead ID was not included, they did not configure that post correctly, or they're missing fields that are required by you to accept that lead. And so if we go into the leads tab here, this is kind of the net result. Obviously, the lead type is really dependent on what you're operating, but the process is the same. We have pings that come in that have bids, pings that come in that do not have any from different sources. And these logs essentially go through what I've just described. All right, we're gonna jump onto the types of inbound leads. So not everything is ping post. We hear a lot of people that come and say, hey, I'm doing leads in ping post. And just speaking about it in generalities as opposed to being specific, because you can buy leads on a ping post basis from vendors. You can sell leads to partners on a ping post basis. And those are mutually exclusive or not mutually exclusive. You can do one or both or neither. All of those are different options depending on the opportunities that you have with your lead buyers and or lead sellers. So, coming here, this is going to be setting up a source or a source vendor combination in the boberdoo system. So in the settings tab, you do have vendors. You can create and manage them here. But there is a flow to add vendors in the source wizard. So we have a lot of options for more sophisticated clients, but anytime you see the word quick or wizard, I would say try that. It's a great place to start. You can always get more complicated, and those options do exist in the system, but this is a great way to get going. So when we talk about types of inbound traffic, we do have those predefined here. This is not going to be 100% of the cases, but this is going to be a good chunk. So looking at this, we have leads that are posting in from your web property, a landing page, a website, whatever that may be. That is not ping post. And the reason is because when somebody goes to your landing page, typically you are not going to be pinging into the system to see if the lead matches. Now, we do have some sophisticated clients that do that so they can decision the lead depending on whether or not it would match, but typically that's not the case. This is a case where you want to post all of the lead details into the system to get it in and have it routed to your partners. So this would have what we call mode equals full, indicating that the full lead details would be submitted. The next use case is a direct post from a vendor. This is very similar to the post coming from your web property. The only difference here is that it is coming from a third party rather than your own landing page. So there's going to be some additional options here to assign a vendor, but then the rest of the options are going to be the same, whether it is a direct post from your web property or a vendor. Both of those cases, they are using mode equals full, and you are setting things like the maximum number of partners per lead, and there is any fixed cost for that lead, and then some additional settings in this wizard here. So that is also not ping post. If your vendor is going to post all of the lead details to you, that is not ping post. So then we do come to those that are ping post. We have the dynamic bid. This is the most common. This gives, whether you are a lead buyer or a lead seller, the most flexibility and the easiest way to change dynamically, no pun intended, your bids that are being returned back to different vendors or lead sellers, margins, volume, limits, things like that. We also have the option of ping post at a fixed cost. So the difference between these two, dynamic bid means that when the ping comes into the boberdoo system, we then will typically build your scenario based off of an exclusionary logic, meaning we're going to remove anybody that's not active, doesn't have available funds, or a matching filter set. And then when we sort these leads, we can get into whether or not that would be based off of the best revenue scenario or priority. But that is going to be what is determined to the bid that will be determined to send back to the vendor. So it'll be whatever you can sell this lead for, in this case to Grace, less your margin. Now, when we have fixed costs, it's the same process, but you're being essentially presented that lead at a specific price. When that ping comes in, you have a lead cost of, say, $10 and a margin. The system will then evaluate whether or not your system can sell the lead at that fixed price plus your margin. So let's say you had a $3 margin, the lead cost was $10. The system would go through this decisioning logic to see if it could sell it for $13 or more. That is something that there are vendors or buyers that do that. In my opinion, it is more restrictive because you may have somebody at $10 or $11 that you can carve out a margin and return a bid back of, say, 6 or 7 to the vendor. Because in most cases, it's not just a binary yes/no decision, but more of a value proposition. Right? There's very rare situations that if you are buying leads from a vendor, you're either going to be buying leads and it's a question of price, how much you're willing to pay for it, or if their leads are not good, you're going to shut them off completely. So we're going to focus on the dynamic bid. It's a very easy process. We're just naming the source. One vendor can have multiple sources because of things like shared and exclusive or tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 quality sources. Again, setting partners per lead, whether that is exclusive or non-exclusive. Setting a cap back. So this is more of a protective measure for you. You know, let's say I don't ever want to return $50, even if I can sell that lead for $1,000. We do have margins primarily handled in the filter sets at this system. Filter sets can be handled in a lot of different ways. And the filter sets does give you the most flexibility. If that is too much, which it is for some companies, we can put it in the source setting and just make it a little bit easier for everybody. Outside services is that third-party API calls for lead scoring that we discussed. And then this is what we do with that lead if the lead comes in and goes into manual review, or if there is a post reject. These settings then, for reporting purposes, set the cost of those to 0. So in your reports, it does not show that you owe that vendor anything. Now, the good news is that if you do post reject a lead to a vendor, they will typically turn around and recalculate their best revenue scenario to see who else they can sell that lead to and sell that in real time to somebody else. So that does shave things like refund processes, gives the vendor more opportunity to sell that lead to somebody else in real time, which allows you to not have things like refund premiums put in place if you are buying those leads. So at the end of this process here, we're going to automatically do things like create the API key or use the existing one, and then we'll be able to download the PDF. This is all that is needed to send to the vendor. So, hey, vendor, here you go. Here's your source settings. Here's your specific switches or things that you need to include. Here's your potential responses, and then a link to our testing page to give them some additional details. So that setup is pretty similar with the fixed cost as well. And at the end, you're going to get those specs from this wizard so that you can send it to who's ever building your website, direct posting or ping posting into your system. So that's going to bring us to the outbound side. So we've covered this kind of step 1 into step 2. Now the question is, when a ping comes in and your system can match the lead to more partners than you allow at that source setting, which is the maximum number of partners per lead. So in these examples, this source can only be sold 1 time, whereas this source can be sold up to 5 times. So that is what I'm talking about here. So the question is, when we have more partners than we can fill, what is the logic that is going to be used to sort these matches? We have what is known as the best revenue scenario. That is the primary method that most clients use, certainly not all. And then what that means is when the lead comes in here, we are going to build the best revenue scenario as defined by the best exclusive buyer against the sum of the non-exclusive buyers that match to that particular ping or lead. There are also best price. So in the case of best price, we are looking for the single best price filter set. In this case, it is Grace, and then we are routing it to Grace. If Grace does not accept that lead, we are post rejecting that lead regardless. We are not trying to recalculate another scenario. We're not trying to sell that lead. It is based exclusively off of selling it to that best price only. The other routing logic would be priority based. So this would be more of a round robin. So I don't, we have this with agencies, health agencies, let's say, that everybody's paying the same price for a lead. And so they want a round robin to go to the partner that's had the longest time since receiving the last lead, or be able to prioritize better performing franchisees, agencies, partners above others by giving them that higher priority. So that is this middle option. We do have some good documentation on the different types of distribution logic. So if that best revenue scenario doesn't work for you, let us know. We can certainly explore some others. So we're going to get into margins. So we've talked a little bit about margins and where they can reside. This system is currently set up to have margins at the filter set level. If I jump to the filter list tab for this lead type, you can see we have different margins set up and there's different types. So going into the partner side and taking a look, first thing we'll do is look at a fixed price lead buyer. So in this case, I am selling leads to this partner, in this case at $10 up to $50 an hour and $500 per day. And if we go into the filter set, that third option is the profit margin. So we have different options here that we're going to go through. In this case here, because I'm selling this lead at $10, we have a $3 margin. That means that when a ping comes in from any of these sources and it matches to this filter set, we will take out $3 and return $7 back to the vendor as their represented bid. Now, there's no real reason to use these other options because $10 is $10. You're always going to sell the lead at a fixed price to that buyer. So then you might as well just take the fixed margin. If we look at these filter sets, the delivery method can be email, can be a direct post to their CRM or dialer. In those cases, it doesn't matter. It's how you are sending them the lead. And then when you are posting them the lead, we are waiting for that success response or that you sent the email before responding with a success to the vendor. We're going to jump over to the other side of the coin here, which is a dynamic buyer. So this is somebody that tells you, I'm not going to give you a fixed price. Ping me that information and I'll give you my bid in real time. So we have two options there. One can be dynamic and the other can be that pinging at a fixed cost that we talked about in the source wizard. So looking at the more common one of the dynamic bidder, you'll notice the price is zero. The reason is you don't know how much they are paying for the lead. They are dynamically bidding on that lead. So in this case, we do have options for either a variable or a scheduled margin. A variable margin basically says if this partner returns a bid between $0 and $5, take a 10% margin. If they return a bid between $5.01 and $10, take a 20% margin. And if they bid over $10, take a 30% margin. This gives you the ability to take more margin, the more your buyer's willing to pay for that lead, and less when there's less. So, the goal is always to return. This is something that's often contradictory to people's thoughts. Your goal should be to return the highest bid back to the vendor that you possibly can and still sell that lead profitably, because that gives you the highest opportunity to make this margin, which is how, if you are in that ping post process, how you make money. From a buyer's perspective, similar philosophy. Your goal should be to return the highest bid that you can for a cost per acquisition that will still back out, because that gives you the highest opportunity to win the lead. And you're winning because you can price that lead dynamically. You're winning that lead at a price that will back out in the cost per acquisition. Scheduled is a little bit less flexible and more based around time than it is based around the bid that is returned. So this allows you to essentially build a schedule to say, I want to take a 20% margin on Sundays, a 10% margin on Mondays, 20% margin on Tuesdays, and so on. This works a lot if there are significant differences based on things like time of day. And it was used more previously. I mean, in my opinion, the variable option is the way to go, because it doesn't matter what time they are taking it out. It's all based off of that bid. But I do understand there are some verticals where, the time of the day during business hours, it is hyper competitive. So that's where that schedule comes in. Finally, we have our AI adjuster. This is something that you probably don't see in your system. We have an AI model that looks for opportunities to bid down the lead. It's primarily for lead buyers, but if it is something that you're interested in working with AI to better price or margin your leads, please let us know. We'd be happy to explore. So other things when we're looking at here, we talked about the minimum margin. The other thing is the minimum price for delivery. This is often the case if you are generating your own leads and you want to establish a floor for the value of those leads. For example, I don't care if they bid less than $2 and they are the best price, I still don't want to sell them. And so that gives you the ability, again, that's typically when you are generating your own leads and you want to establish a value. Or at a below price, it's not worth selling because of things like refunds. So the next thing that we'll look at is pinging at a fixed cost. So you'll see here, there is a price in this filter set. As we go through it, it is $10. So essentially, you are going to ping this buyer at the $10 and see if you can sell that lead. They will reply back with a yes or a no, a success or error matched or unmatched response based off of that value and not a dynamic one. The process is the same. You're pinging them out. Any lead that comes in that matches this filter set, they are bidding the lead. If you are getting a ping from a vendor, it is $10 minus that $3 margin. You would be returning a $7 bid to that vendor. All right. The next thing, we'll kind of take a look at it from a lead buyer's perspective, using the same system, same tools. When we look at, lead buyers that use Boberdoo, primary reasons are, one, to manage buyers. I won't put us through the source wizard again, but when you go through this the second time, you can get a source and sources instructions or vendors instructions in an email to them so that they can build that process of building that ping post into your system within a minute or so. So really, lead buyers typically will work out of filter sets. So if we come in here, typically we'll see a filter set to individual source, 1-to-1 ratio. And so what we see here is the different sources that are pinging into this lead type, different prices, hourly, daily limits that are set up so that those leads back out to a specific cost per acquisition. So if we look at those, filter sets exactly, again, you'll see the AI adjuster is often turned on if we're engaged in that. But this is the price that the lead buyer, the agency, is willing to pay. This is where we are sending the lead if it's purchased successfully. These are limits, time of day, day of week limits, or bids that can be put in. So you can dynamically bid on those leads or right price them. And then that would extend to any of those fields that get pinged over. Sub ID being a big one. In this particular lead type, things like age and household income. So you may have different prices or different bids based off of a 40,000 income versus a 60,000 income or things like that. Age would be a big one too. So the idea then is you can set up those filter sets. The vendor is paying into your system. You can then typically set pricing once a day, once a week, whatever that frequency is for your organization, and then control your limits to make sure you meet your demand. So whether you're controlling your call center demand through hourly and daily limits or individual agents, we have both clients that do both. All right. So that is everything that I wanted to cover with the lead system. Touch on a handful of different things when it comes to ping post. I'd like to open it up for any questions that you have. That don't see any coming around the chat. Let me unmute. I guess I can only ask you to unmute. So you are open to unmuting if you'd like. And happy to tackle any questions, whether that's over voice or chat. I'll take it that person didn't have a question. All right, the question, a large window client, in terms of getting started, as far as building that partner account, they need 3 things in Boberdoo. If that's what you're asking, like from a technical standpoint, how to get them going. We'd set up an active account, available funds, and a matching filter set. So if they're large, I'm assuming you're going to invoice them. I can go through kind of an off-the-cuff version of what I would do, essentially using that quick partner. You could either give them a credit limit, or if they're prepaying for leads, depending on how that goes, that's a big part of selling leads. And then you're creating the filter sets. So this is based off of their demand and what specs they give you. The lead price is what you would negotiate. margins, and depending whether you're getting pings from third parties or these your own leads that are being routed into the system. This lead buyer, if they're large, they have posting specs, whether that is ping post or direct post. Essentially, the seller conforms to the buyer. So the typical flow, you get those specs. We build most clients' deliveries, and then they essentially are in this delivery option here, so you can assign it to the appropriate filter set. Any of these limits would typically be if they are a fixed price buyer. I'm going to pay $50 for up to 20 leads a day in these 5 states, or whatever that would be for windows or those projects. And then essentially, that's the last step. So we can save it. You have to have one source selected. Good job, Scott. And here that filter set is, essentially set up and ready to go. So when a lead comes in, they would have an active account. We gave them a credit for the available funds, and then we created that filter set. So if the lead comes in from city, no, radius on zip code, yes. So the options for building revolve around zip code. So the reason being that city is a open text field. So we do have clients that generate 100% of their leads. So all of the cities come into in an exact format. But typically it is done by zip code, county as well.